Hi, Dr. Watson here, and we're going to be using Finale to put measure numbers into a lead sheet. You can see I have the Kenny Dorham tune Blue Bossa open, and we're going to be using the measure tool. Let me zoom into it here. You can see it looks like a whole rest. If you float your cursor over the tool, measure tool appears, right? So choose that tool. And you'll notice that with like with most tools in Finale, a measure menu appears that corresponds with the measure tool. Also today we're going to be using the staff tool, and notice when I choose the staff tool, which looks like a treble clef, the staff menu appears in that same position. So anyway, let's go back to the measure tool. It's simply, we're going to select the first measure menu item called Edit Measure Number Regions. A big dialog box pops open. We're going to deselect everything for this first area is for the first measure of every staff. So we're going to just turn all of that off. But down here, this next area of the measure number dialog box has to do with measure numbers other than the first measure of every staff. So anyway, we're going to say show on every measure, and then there's a position button. Where do you want to put those measure numbers? And that's the position. Here it's set to center. If you wanted it to be aligned to the left, you could do that, right? I'm going to leave it at center, though. I like it on the center. And then if you want to, maybe give it a little bit more room, you can drag it up and down. You really can put it anywhere just by dragging it, but I'm going to drag it a little lower. And that's where the measure numbers are going to appear. And because we've selected this, it's going to be on every measure. So go ahead and say OK. And now you'll notice that on every measure, let me just zoom in a little bit. Okay, on every measure number now, we've got a measure number. It's super helpful when you're creating music for students or amateur musicians to be able to refer to a measure. Okay, I did want to show you another thing. Using the staff menu, and again, the first, not the first staff item, but the one that says Edit Staff Attributes, there is a checkbox to show or not show measure numbers. So if for some reason you wanted to turn the measure numbers off, watch what happens when you turn measure numbers off. Now we've lost all those measure numbers. They don't appear again. And if you go back to that same Edit Staff Attributes and click Measure Numbers again, now they're back. Okay, the only other thing you might be interested in is rehearsal numbers. Now that actually is another tool. That's the expression tool, this one that says Mezzo Forte. I'm going to choose that. And in the expression tool, you normally just double click in a measure and it opens up. Maybe you want to put in dynamics or tempos or whatever, but rehearsal numbers is one type of expression that you can add. And if it's defined correctly, you'll have this generic measure number as a choice already. It should already be in Finale. And when you say assign, it gives you a measure number that when you move it, right, becomes measure 2, right? So now it's measure 2. If I move it down to measure 6, it'll say measure 6, right? So wherever you put it, wherever you would have that measure number appear, here now it's at measure 10. And so it says measure 10. I'll show you quickly how to define that, but that's sort of the advanced part of this thing. So if it isn't defined, when you double click on a measure, you would see sort of a blank like this. There would be nothing there. And you would say down here, create a rehearsal mark, because you're in the rehearsal mark category of Finale expressions. Create a rehearsal mark. And then down here, you would say use auto sequencing. That's what makes it choose whatever measure you want. And the auto sequencing, I would just choose the measure number. And then I would also choose to have an enclosure of a rectangle. And that's what we just had there. So now we've got this generic measure number that wherever we put it, here it is over on measure 4 now, right? So on measure 4, it now changes to measure 4. So you might want to put rehearsal numbers in on some Finale documents. Okay, and then lastly, if you use the selection tool, just say for some reason a measure number, like say for instance I felt like measure 13, the number's too close to the beams. You can drag just that measure out of the way. One more thing I'll show you too. If you don't want to use the expression tool to create these nice large rehearsal numbers, a real quick and easy way is let's go back to the tool we started with, the measure tool. Watch what happens when I double click on measure 9. I'm going to double click. There's a little handle. Let me see if I can blow this up. There you go. So if you see the handle, it's that little box that enables me to drag the measure number around. Okay, if I double click on that handle, I get a dialog box that asks me if I want to put a shape around that particular measure number. So I'll take the rectangle default and say OK, and watch what happens to measure 9. Now measure 9 has a box, and I could drag it above, and I could have, instead of below, I've got it. Now the reason I like using the expression tool rather than the measure number, the measure tool, is that with the expression tool I can still have the number underneath. So here in measure 4, where I have a rehearsal number up here that was created with the expression tool, I still have the measure number underneath. You can also use the expression tool. Oh, I know what it is. It's up in the measure menu. I can say hide the measure number. So now measure 4 will actually be, it looks like it's still there, but it's like a lighter color, and when it prints out you won't actually see it. So lots of things you can do with measure numbers, but the most important thing is that measure menu, edit measure numbers in the region, and then unselect all of the choices here and select show every one measure here, and then position the measure numbers where you want it, and you'll end up getting this nice measure number underneath every single measure, which is super helpful.